Hey, it is Tiki Technical Tuesday. We are here for episode 3 of the Fountain Project. Inside of this kiln, the water bearer is just gotten cool enough for us to take a look at. But before we get there, we should probably catch you up on where we are in the journey of the water bearer fountain. Our adventure begins here, right at the end of taping the last episode. I moved the still very damp water bearer sculpture over to another clay table where it could hang out for a long time undisturbed. Now this is where we begin the extremely slow drying process. I've got several plastic bags on this. I've got plastic bags on his hands, and I've also got a big plastic bag with holes cut out on it over the top. Every morning I would come in, check it for cracks, and then rebag it until the next day. This would continue on and on and on until I felt that it was dry enough to spend a few nights in the studio without a plastic bag on it. Now, it took time. You simply cannot rush the drying process for a piece this big, or else it would lead to a lot of problems in the end. As the piece dries, it is shrinking quite a bit, and you can see here why I put it onto this plastic film. See all this puckering here? This was completely flat when this started drying, but now it's all puckered because the piece is shrinking and pulling the plastic in. So that's why I have the trash bag on here. 2 layers of plastic. It skates like ice, and that lets the piece shrink without any resistance and avoids cracks forming as all the weight crushes down on the bottom while the bottom is shrinking in. Hopefully this keeps working because this still has some shrinking to go. Once the piece got to a relatively safe degree of dryness, I thought it was time to speed up the process. So I transferred the water bearer over to this cart and we moved it into the kiln room where we would have the kilns firing and we could get the room temperature up and the ambient humidity down. Okay, so we had a bisque fire overnight in that far kiln over there. And it seems to have dried out our idol very nicely. The water bearer is much more arid, if you will. So I'm going to now do another firing in this kiln, and we're going to do a bisque firing of the actual bowls. These bowls have been sitting out for weeks. They are definitely dry. So I'm going to do the first experimental firing of the Timberline sculptural clay body. I've never fired it before, so I'm going to do it super slow. It's very thick. The bowls are not as thick as the actual, main idol sculpture itself, but they're still thick. So I'm going to do a very slow bisque firing, and I'm going to candle it, which means I'm going to keep the kiln at a temperature below 200 degrees, below the boiling point of water, for probably 3 hours. And that will bake out any additional moisture in that clay before I ramp up the temperature. Because if any moisture hits the boiling point, it will turn to steam, expand like 200%, and blow the clay to pieces. So we want to avoid that. So anyway, first thing we're going to do a candle. But before we even put the things in here, I'm going to use doll sand. It's basically some silica, and the purpose for this is to act like little ball bearings underneath the clay to help it slide around. Because it's going to shrink, again, it's going to shrink in here. And I have found that when I fire big, heavy objects inside of a kiln, sometimes they can stick to the bottom of the kiln as they're shrinking and they'll tear themselves apart. So I just want to put down like a little itty bitty trace of silica ball bearings to help that clay slide around. A big thank you to Georgie's Ceramics in Eugene. They are the best, and they helped me through this. I was debating to use this or grog, and apparently this is the way to go. These are big. Hopefully I can get both in here. Ooh, it's tight. All right. All right, it's Monday morning. The idol is very dry. Super happy with it. Let's take a look and see how the bowls turned out. No cracks. So the bowls turned out great. I am going to give the idol a few more days in the kiln room while I fire some more of the volcanic vapor mugs just to get it completely bone dry before I risk doing a bisque firing on it. So even though these have been in the kiln room and are very warm next to the kiln, in fact, you can see here, they are extremely warm, almost 100 degrees to the touch, we discovered that they were still a lot of moisture inside of the piece. So we lifted it up on this stand to allow airflow to get inside of the water bearer, and we left it into the kiln room for another round of firings to just make sure all moisture had gotten out of the piece. Okay, it has been sitting here drying for days and days. We've had the fan on it, the kilns have been going. I think I've gotten all the moisture out of this clay that I can, so we are going to put it into the kiln for a bisque firing. So I'm trying to stay cool, calm, and collected here, but this is really stressful. The thing is extremely heavy, and it's like a sandcastle. There's really nothing holding this clay together, and it's so heavy that as I'm exerting pressure to hold it, I'm afraid I'm going to just crush it inside of my hands. So, yeah, a little bit of stress at this stage of the process. It is so heavy. So now that we've got the pieces all in the bisque firing, we need to talk about glaze. And that brings us to this. This little test I did with a glaze that I love. It is called Satin Patina by Mako. I've always wanted to give it a try for a piece, and I've only done tests before with it as a brushed application. So I did a spray for the first time with this. I did 3 coats sprayed. Half of this has black under it, half of it doesn't. And it did some cool stuff. It crystallized. You can see these like little flavor crystals on there. Now, I'm not gonna fall into the glaze trap of thinking that this is actually gonna happen on the real piece. It probably won't. The crystals, I think, are a fluke. But I do love the color, and I think that this is what we're gonna go with for the big piece. It's a beautiful Friday morning, a little chilly outside. But look what isn't chilly, the kiln. That's right, the firing is finished, but as you can see, it is still extremely hot inside of the kiln. In fact, it's so hot that we won't be able to peek inside until maybe later tonight, but most likely we're gonna have to wait until tomorrow morning. This is the hardest part of ceramics for me, is waiting for this thing to cool off. This is it. We've given it a full 24 hours. It is the next morning, and as you can see, we're at a safe temperature. We're below 200 degrees. Now, I have not peeked in here. I don't know what's going on. I did look through the little peephole, and I saw the front of the nose, but we don't know. Maybe the arms are gone. Maybe he's intact and happy. I don't know. Let's find out. I really hope it's okay. Yeah! It turned out so well. No cracks. I see no cracks. Ah, fantastic. Oh, wait. Looks like a small crack here in the bottom. It's just a little fleck. So that's from it shrinking in the kiln. No biggie, no biggie. looks fantastic. Time to start thinking about glaze. Not only did the idol turn out great, but both of the bowls survived the bisque firing perfectly. So the first step in glazing is I want to coat these things with black underglaze and then wipe it away. Why am I doing this? Well, I want to really accentuate the texture of the stone, and I'm going to do this by putting on black, wiping it away so that the upper layers of bisque clay show white and all the recesses are black. And hopefully that'll let the cracks really pop when we move on to the next step of applying glaze. As soon as the underglaze was dry, it was time to move on to the second step of the wiping process, and that's the wiping. Using a wet sponge, I cleared away the uppermost layers of the underglaze that I just sprayed onto the bisque fountain. I want to let the white clay show through on the raised areas, and I want to leave that black underglaze in all of the lower areas and cracks, and it really makes the texture pop. Okay, I think that'll do it. We've got a nice wash on there. It brings out all of the stone texture that we put in. Yeah, and I left the insides of the pools dark. I don't know how much that's going to show through the glaze that we're putting on, but I'm hoping it'll show through a little and add some depth to the pools. Who knows? But yeah, I love the way this guy looks over there. We're going to let these dry, always having to let things dry before we spray the glaze on. We want this bisque clay to be as dry as possible so that when we spray the glaze on, the glaze will really stick and grab to the clay. So that's why that's why I did this at the end of the day today, so I can give it a whole 24 hours for this to dry out in the studio. The good thing is we've got the kiln going right now. You may hear it clicking away. So it'll be nice and warm here tonight, and these things should get nice and dry. And hopefully, we can get glaze on them tomorrow, get them in the kiln, get them fired, so that they will be finished in time for next Tuesday. All right, it's the next morning, and this is nice and dry. So I think it's safe for us to apply the glaze. Now, before I put glaze on the outside, we have to think about the inside. Okay, so on the inside, you can see there are some very, very tiny cracks here, just in the areas where we joined the seams together. And I wasn't able to, since this was on the inside where the foam was, I couldn't really get a good stitch going on to really lock these slabs together. Now, I want to get glaze inside of these cracks so that when this thing is outside in the elements, water isn't able to work its way into these cracks and, freeze and force them apart. So this morning we're glazing the inside, gonna let it dry, and this afternoon we're glazing the outside. So I'm going to be using the same glaze on the inside as I'm using on the outside. Now, those of you watching this at home may be thinking, why aren't you using a inexpensive, just a clear glaze to seal it? I could, but I just so happen to have a bunch of this satin patina glaze. I thought I was going to use it on another project, so I've got it. I'm just going to go ahead and use it on the inside, which I'm applying with a brush here because it's an awkward space. Oh, that is so heavy. Okay, I'm gonna let this dry for the next few hours, and then this afternoon we will hit it with the spray gun and get it in the kiln tonight. When I bought this amazing spray booth, which I love, I thought I would never need to get the larger model until today. So I gotta take a bunch of stuff out of here in order to fit the water bearer into it. Let's spray some glaze. I'm going to be doing 3 coats of glaze with the spray gun, and in between each one of these coats, it's essential for the first coat to be totally dry before you apply the second coat, and to speed that process up, I use a heat gun. So I spray on a coat, I dry it with the heat gun, then I spray on the next coat, heat gun, coat, and so forth and so on. Okay, I got 3 coats on there. That last coat, the third coat, I put it on really heavy at the top and then kind of faded it away towards the bottom, just so I want it to look like it's weathered outside. So I'm hoping there'll be some subtle color shift from the top to the bottom. Maybe nothing will happen. Maybe something will happen. You never know. You can never tell with glaze. But yeah, I think this guy is ready for his final glaze firing, and I am super excited. Also, a little nervous, but excited. All right, the glaze is dried and it's ready to go in the kiln. But before I put this in the kiln, I want to talk briefly about that glaze test that we did the other day. Remember this guy? I love the way this glaze turned out. It has these cool flavor crystals on it that look really neat, but I don't think this one's going to do that. Now, these are the exact same glaze I sprayed on. This is what it looks like before firing. This is what it looks like after firing. But I'm going to fire this one on a slow cone 6 program, where I did this one on a medium. I decided to just slow it down because it's such a big form. I want to avoid any thermal shock, any additional stress, so I'm just going to ease into that final temperature, which means maybe there will be no crystals, maybe there will be more crystals. You never know. I can guarantee it'll still be greenish, but it will probably not look the same. And I'm okay with that. I'm cool with that. As long as you come out in one piece, I'll be happy. I'll be happy. So everybody, let's all cross our fingers, and I'm going to put this into the kiln. Oh, it's so heavy. Whew. Cross them. For those of you at home who are keeping score, I have not forgotten about the bowls. As soon as I loaded the kiln, I went back into the booth and sprayed glaze on the 2 bowls that will go underneath the water bearer fountain. These are going to go into kiln number 2, but the kiln is still too hot for me to open up, unload, and put these in. So they will probably have to wait until tomorrow morning to fire. All right, we're back to the kiln. It's cool. The glaze firing is done. I haven't looked in here. We're going to do this together. Let's all keep the fingers crossed. Oh man. So it's different, but it's good. Oh, it's beautiful. But that's not all. We've also got the bowls in here, and they are also cool enough to open. Now they're still at like 210 degrees, so I am going to glove up, and let's take a peek. Oh. Wow. That's great. No cracks. Yeah. I really was hoping that this would be in the ground with water flowing out of the top of it by the end of this episode, but it's Friday afternoon. I just don't think I'm going to get it done this weekend, so we're going to wrap it up here. I could not be happier with the way that the water bearer has turned out so far. Is the glaze just like it was in the test piece? No, but it is still super cool. I love the variations in the green. It looks like mossy old stone. The cracks, I love how the black underglaze pops. It really makes them stand out. I could not be happier with the results, and I am so grateful it survived the firings. In episode 4, the finale of the fountain, we are going to have to drill a hole in the top. We're going to have to get electrical out to the yard. Lots of stuff. So, I mean, it'll probably be a very short episode. Hopefully it'll have a happy ending. But yeah, we will wrap everything up in the next and final episode of the Fountain Project. Can't wait to see you then. Thanks for tagging along.